The courtroom buzzed with whispers as I walked in, my son's laughter echoing off the marble walls, my daughter-in-law shaking her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. I could feel every gaze in the room, the weight of their judgment pressing down on me as I took my seat at the defendant's table. The judge, a man I hadn't seen in decades, went pale, his hand trembling as he whispered to the clerk, "My God, is that really her?" For a moment, the world seemed to stop. My son, David, smirked at his lawyer, certain of victory, while my daughter-in-law, Rachel, avoided my eyes, her lips pressed into a thin, triumphant line. No one in that room had a clue who I really was, until that day. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. I sat tall, my heart pounding, but my mind clear. I remembered the years of sacrifice, raising David alone after his mother died, building a business from nothing, and always being the one to compromise. I'd watched my son change after marrying into money, watched Rachel's cold ambition turn him into a stranger. The lawsuit was the final blow. They wanted control of my estate, claiming I was unfit to manage my own affairs. They laughed behind my back, certain I was powerless. But I had spent years preparing for this moment. I'd hired the best lawyer in the city, gathered evidence of my competence, and quietly documented every insult, every attempt to manipulate me. I even found an old friend, now a respected judge, who agreed to testify on my behalf. As the trial began, David's lawyer painted me as confused and incapable. David smirked, Rachel rolled her eyes, but my lawyer was ready, presenting medical records, financial statements, and letters from friends and neighbors attesting to my independence. Then came the turning point. The judge, reviewing my credentials, suddenly went pale. "My God, is that really her?" he whispered, recognizing me as the woman who had once saved his family's business decades ago. The courtroom buzzed with shock. My lawyer revealed my true story, the business I'd built, the charities I'd funded, the lives I'd changed. The judge, now fully aware, addressed the court. "This woman is a pillar of our community. She deserves respect, not ridicule." My son and daughter-in-law's confidence crumbled. Their lawyer, flustered, tried to recover, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge reprimanded them for their greed and arrogance, his words echoing through the silent room. The verdict was swift, the lawsuit was dismissed, and David and Rachel were ordered to pay my legal fees. The courtroom erupted in whispers, my son's face red with shame, my daughter-in-law unable to meet my gaze. As I left the courthouse, old friends and neighbors reached out, offering support and respect. My son tried to apologize, but I told him, respect is earned, not demanded. With the case behind me, I used my experience to help others, volunteering at a local support group for seniors facing family betrayal. I found new purpose in sharing my story and helping others find their own strength. The story ends with me sitting in my garden, a cup of tea in hand, not as a victim, but as a survivor. I raise a toast to the future, grateful for the lesson learned and the peace I found in standing up for myself, and for the family I refused to let be destroyed by greed. After the courtroom emptied and the whispers faded, I walked out into the bright sunlight, feeling the weight of years finally lift from my shoulders. But as I made my way home, the memories came flooding back, each one a reminder of how far I'd come, and how much I'd lost along the way. I remembered the early days after my wife died, when David was just a boy, his hand small in mine as we faced the world together. I worked 2 jobs, built a business from scratch, and poured every ounce of love and energy into giving him a life I never had. For years, it was just the 2 of us, quiet dinners, homework at the kitchen table, laughter echoing through the house on weekends. But as David grew older, things changed. He became distant, drawn to the flash and promise of his new friends, the ones who measured worth in money and status. When he met Rachel, I saw the shift almost immediately. She was beautiful, ambitious, and sharp-tongued, her eyes always scanning the room for someone more important. At first, I tried to welcome her, hoping she'd see the value in family, in hard work, in the quiet dignity that had carried us through so much. But Rachel had other plans. She pushed David to move to the city, to take a job in her father's company, to leave behind the small-town life that had shaped him. The calls grew less frequent, the visits shorter, and when they did come, it was always with a list of complaints, about the house, the food, the lack of culture. I swallowed my pride, tried to keep the peace, but every holiday, every birthday, I felt myself shrinking, my role in David's life reduced to that of a distant, embarrassing relative. The final blow came when they filed the lawsuit, claiming I was unfit to manage my own affairs. The betrayal stung, but it also woke something in me, a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I began to document everything, the missed calls, the forgotten birthdays, the way Rachel would roll her eyes when I tried to share a story from my past. I kept every letter, every email, every text that hinted at their true motives. I reached out to old friends, neighbors, even former employees, gathering statements and building a case that would prove, once and for all, that I was not the helpless old man they wanted the world to see. As the weeks passed and the court date approached, I found strength in the memories of my wife, in the lessons she'd taught me about resilience and self-respect. I realized that the real battle was not just for my estate, but for my dignity, and for the right to define my own legacy. The day I walked into that courtroom, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every parent who had ever been underestimated, every elder who had been pushed aside, every family torn apart by greed and pride. And as I sat at the defendant's table, my heart pounding but my mind clear, I knew that whatever happened next, I would not go quietly. The story was far from over, and the next chapter would test me in ways I could never have imagined. The weeks leading up to the trial were a masterclass in humiliation, each day bringing a new slight, a new reminder of how far I'd fallen in my own son's eyes. David and Rachel stopped calling altogether, their silence a wall I couldn't break through. When I did hear from them, it was through their lawyer, a man who spoke to me as if I were a child, his tone patronizing, his words carefully chosen to make me doubt my own memory. "We're just concerned about your well-being, Mr. Wallace," he'd say, his voice syrupy. "David and Rachel want what's best for you." I knew better. I saw the way Rachel looked at me during the rare family dinners she deigned to attend, her eyes cold, her smile tight. She'd whisper to David, her words just loud enough for me to hear, "He's not the man he used to be. He's holding us back." David, once my little boy, now sat at the head of the table, his laughter forced, his loyalty bought and paid for by a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. The lawsuit was the final insult. They claimed I was unfit to manage my own affairs, that I was forgetful, confused, a danger to myself and others. They wanted control of my estate, my business, my home, the life I'd built with my own two hands. The papers arrived on a rainy Tuesday, the envelope thick and official, the words inside a knife to the heart. I sat at the kitchen table, the rain tapping against the window, and felt the old anger rise. I wasn't confused. I wasn't helpless. I was angry, and I was done being underestimated. I called Carter, my lawyer, and told him everything, every insult, every slight, every attempt to push me out of my own life. Carter listened, his voice calm but fierce. "We'll fight this, Peter. You're not alone." Together, we began to build a case. I gathered medical records, financial statements, letters from friends and neighbors who knew the truth. I found an old friend, now a respected judge, who agreed to testify on my behalf. I documented every interaction with David and Rachel, every missed call, every forgotten birthday, every moment that proved I was still the man I'd always been. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep the betrayal went. Rachel had been quietly pushing David to take control for years, whispering in his ear, planting seeds of doubt, turning my own son against me. The realization hurt, but it also steeled my resolve. I would not let them win. I would not let them rewrite my story. As the court date approached, I found strength in the memories of my wife, in the lessons she'd taught me about dignity and self-respect. I remembered her laughter, her wisdom, the way she'd always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. I promised her, and myself, that I would fight, not just for my estate, but for my legacy, for the right to define my own life. The night before the trial, I sat by the fire, the house quiet around me, and made a silent vow. I would walk into that courtroom with my head held high, no matter what they threw at me. The next day, the world would see who I really was, and the tables would finally turn. The night before the trial, I barely slept. I sat in my study, surrounded by stacks of documents, old photographs, and the quiet hum of memories that refused to fade. The house felt different, emptier, but also stronger, as if the walls themselves were bracing for the storm to come. I thought of my wife, her portrait watching over me from the mantel, her eyes full of the same quiet strength I tried to summon now. I remembered the early days, when David was just a boy and every decision felt like a leap of faith. I remembered the sacrifices, the long hours, the moments of doubt and fear. But most of all, I remembered the promise I'd made to her, to protect our family, to honor our legacy, and to never let anyone, no matter how close, take away what we'd built together. Carter arrived just after dawn, his briefcase bulging with evidence, his face set in a mask of determination. "We're ready, Peter," he said, his voice steady. "You've done everything right. Now it's time to show them who you really are." We went over the plan one last time, medical records to prove my competence, financial statements to show my independence, letters from friends and neighbors attesting to my character. Carter had even tracked down an old friend, Judge Harris, who agreed to testify about the business I'd saved decades ago, the lives I'd changed, the respect I'd earned. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I dressed carefully, choosing the suit my wife had bought me for our last anniversary, the one she'd said made me look like a man who knows his own mind. I looked in the mirror, searching for the man I used to be, and found him staring back, older, yes, but unbroken. I drove to the courthouse in silence, the city waking up around me, the streets full of people who had no idea what was about to unfold. When I arrived, the building buzzed with energy, lawyers, reporters, family members all milling about, their voices a low hum of anticipation. I walked through the doors, my head held high, my heart pounding but my mind clear. Inside, the courtroom was already filling up. David and Rachel sat at the plaintiff's table, their lawyer whispering urgently, their faces a mix of confidence and nerves. I took my seat beside Carter, the weight of years settling on my shoulders. The judge entered, her presence commanding instant silence. "This is not just a case about money or reputation," she said, her voice steady. "This is about truth, dignity, and the right to define one's own legacy." I glanced at David, searching for a flicker of the boy I'd raised, but all I saw was a stranger, his eyes cold, his smile forced. Rachel avoided my gaze, her confidence already beginning to crack. As the trial began, I felt a surge of resolve. I was not just fighting for myself, I was fighting for every parent who had ever been underestimated, every elder who had been pushed aside, every family torn apart by greed and pride. The next hours would test me in ways I could never have imagined, but I was ready. The story was far from over, and the real battle was just beginning. The trial opened with a tension so thick it seemed to press against my chest, every eye in the courtroom fixed on me as if waiting for me to stumble. David's lawyer wasted no time, painting a picture of me as a confused, fragile old man, incapable of managing my own affairs. "Mr. Wallace," he intoned, "has shown a pattern of forgetfulness, missed appointments, and questionable financial decisions. My clients are only concerned for his well-being." David sat beside him, his smirk barely concealed, while Rachel's gaze flickered between her phone and the judge, her confidence radiating from every dismissive glance. I sat still, my hands folded, letting Carter do the talking. He began with the basics, my medical records, signed by 2 independent doctors, both attesting to my mental sharpness and physical health. He presented my financial statements, showing not only that my accounts were in order, but that I'd quietly grown the family business in the years since David had left. The judge listened, her expression unreadable, but I saw the flicker of interest when Carter called our first witness, Judge Harris, my old friend. Harris took the stand, his presence commanding instant respect. "I've known Peter Wallace for over 30 years, he said, his voice steady. "He's one of the sharpest, most ethical people I've ever met. He saved my family's business when no one else would. If he's unfit, then none of us are fit to run our own lives." The courtroom buzzed, the tide beginning to turn. Carter then produced letters from neighbors, friends, and former employees, each one a testament to my independence and character. "Peter is the first to help, the last to ask for anything in return," one letter read. "He's the backbone of this community." David's lawyer tried to rattle me on the stand, asking about missed birthdays, forgotten appointments, the time I'd locked myself out of the house. I answered each question calmly, refusing to let him twist my words. "Everyone forgets things," I said. "But I've never forgotten who I am, or what I stand for." The judge nodded, her respect clear. Rachel's confidence began to crack, her whispers to David growing more frantic. As the day wore on, Carter revealed the final piece of our legal trap, a series of emails Rachel had sent to David, urging him to push the old man out and take control before he gives it all away. The judge's eyes narrowed as she read the messages, her patience wearing thin. "This is not concern for a parent," she said, her voice cold. "This is greed, plain and simple." The courtroom was silent, the power dynamic shifting in an instant. I looked at David, searching for a flicker of the boy I'd raised, but all I saw was a man who had lost his way. As the judge called a recess, Carter leaned over and whispered, "We've got them, Peter. The truth is finally out." I nodded, my heart pounding with a mix of relief and sorrow. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, I believed we could win, not just the case, but the right to define our own legacy. The next day would bring the turning point, and I was ready. The second day of the trial began with a tension that seemed to vibrate in the very air, every seat in the courtroom filled, every eye watching for the next twist. I sat quietly, my hands folded, my mind replaying Carter's words from the night before, "The truth is finally out." David and Rachel arrived late, their faces drawn, their confidence from the first day replaced by a brittle edge. The judge entered, her gaze sweeping the room, her expression unreadable. As Carter called our next witness, the judge paused, her eyes lingering on me. "Mr. Wallace," she said, her voice softer than before, "I've been reviewing your file. I didn't realize until last night that you were the same Peter Wallace who saved my father's business all those years ago." The room went silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone. "My father always said you were the most honorable man he ever met. I owe my career to the chance you gave our family." David's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, Rachel's eyes widened, and a ripple of whispers moved through the gallery. The judge's recognition changed everything. Her questions grew sharper, her patience for David and Rachel's lawyer thinner. Carter seized the moment, presenting more evidence of my competence, letters from local business owners, a video of me giving a speech at the community center, even a recent article about my volunteer work. The judge listened, her respect for me growing with every new piece of evidence. "It's clear to this court," she said, "that Mr. Wallace is not only fit to manage his affairs, but is a pillar of this community." David's smirk faded, replaced by a look of panic. Rachel stared at the table, her hands clenched in her lap. Carter pressed the advantage, calling Judge Harris to the stand. Harris spoke of my integrity, my generosity, and the way I'd helped countless families in their darkest hours. "Peter Wallace is the kind of man we should all aspire to be," he said, his voice ringing through the courtroom. The judge nodded, her decision all but made. "Thank you, Judge Harris. Your testimony is invaluable." As the day wore on, the tide turned completely. The gallery, once full of skeptics, now watched David and Rachel with a mix of pity and contempt. The judge called a recess, her final words echoing in my mind, "This court will not tolerate greed or manipulation. The truth will prevail." As I left the courtroom, old friends and neighbors stopped me in the hallway, their congratulations genuine, their respect clear. I felt a surge of pride, not just for myself, but for the legacy I'd built, the family, the business, the community that had stood by me when it mattered most. That night, as I sat by the fire, the house quiet around me, I realized that the real revenge was not in David and Rachel's suffering, but in the respect I'd earned, the dignity I'd reclaimed, and the hope that tomorrow would be brighter than today. The journey was not over, but the turning point had come. The next day would bring the final confrontation, and I was ready to face it with my head held high. The final day of the trial dawned with a sense of anticipation that seemed to electrify the very air. The courtroom was packed, the gallery buzzing with whispers about the judge's recognition and the evidence that had already turned the tide. I sat at the defendant's table, Carter beside me, his confidence now matched by a quiet satisfaction. David and Rachel looked smaller than ever, their lawyer's briefcase stuffed with arguments that no longer held any weight. The judge entered, her presence commanding instant silence. "We will now hear closing arguments," she announced, her gaze lingering on me with a respect that made my heart swell. Carter stood, his voice steady and clear. "This case is not about confusion or incapacity. It's about dignity, legacy, and the right to define one's own life. Peter Wallace has spent a lifetime building not just a business, but a community. He deserves respect, not ridicule." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The evidence is clear. The only confusion here is the confusion of those who would take what is not theirs." The judge nodded, her approval unmistakable. Then, in a move that caught everyone off guard, Carter called one last witness, the director of the local charity I'd supported for years. She spoke of the scholarships I'd funded, the families I'd helped, the quiet acts of kindness that had changed lives. "Peter Wallace is the reason my son went to college," she said, her voice trembling. "He's the reason so many of us have hope." The gallery erupted in applause, the judge banging her gavel for order. David's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. "This court has heard enough." She turned to me, her eyes shining. "Mr. Wallace, do you have anything to say?" I stood, my voice steady. "I never wanted this fight. I only wanted respect, for myself, for my family, for the life I built. I hope my son and daughter-in-law learn that respect is earned, not demanded." The judge nodded, her decision clear. "Thank you, Mr. Wallace. You have shown this court what true dignity looks like." As I sat down, I saw David's face crumple, the realization of what he'd lost finally sinking in. Rachel looked away, her confidence shattered. The courtroom was silent, the power dynamic forever changed. The real confrontation was over, but the consequences were just beginning. As I left the courthouse, old friends and neighbors stopped me to offer congratulations, their respect genuine. I felt a peace I hadn't known in years, the weight of betrayal finally lifting. The journey was almost over, but the lesson would last a lifetime. The next day would bring the verdict, and with it, the final act of a story that had started with humiliation and ended with triumph. The morning of the verdict arrived with a hush that seemed to settle over the entire city. I woke before dawn, unable to sleep, my mind replaying every moment of the trial, the humiliation of David's laughter, the sting of Rachel's dismissive glances, the judge's pale face when she recognized me, and the applause that had followed the charity director's testimony. I dressed carefully, choosing the same suit I'd worn on the first day, the one my wife had always said made me look like a man who knows his own worth. The courthouse was already crowded when I arrived, the gallery packed with neighbors, old friends, and even a few reporters who had caught wind of the story. Carter met me at the door, his handshake firm, his eyes full of quiet confidence. "No matter what happens, Peter, you've already won." I nodded, my heart pounding as we took our seats. David and Rachel sat across the aisle, their faces drawn, their confidence from the first day now replaced by a brittle, desperate hope. The judge entered, her presence commanding instant silence. She looked at me, then at David and Rachel, her voice steady as she read the verdict. "This court finds in favor of the defendant, Peter Wallace. The lawsuit is dismissed. All legal fees are to be paid by the plaintiffs. Furthermore, the court finds no evidence of incapacity or mismanagement. Mr. Wallace is fully competent to manage his affairs." The words seemed to hang in the air, unreal, as the gallery erupted in whispers. David's face went red, his hands shaking as he tried to speak, but the judge silenced him with a look. Rachel stared at the floor, her arrogance finally broken. Carter squeezed my shoulder, his smile wide. "You did it, Peter. You stood your ground." I felt a wave of relief and pride wash over me, the years of doubt and humiliation finally giving way to a sense of triumph I hadn't known in decades. As the courtroom emptied, old friends and neighbors stopped to shake my hand, their congratulations genuine, their respect clear. The judge approached, her voice low. "Thank you, Mr. Wallace. You reminded us all what dignity looks like." I nodded, my heart full. Outside, the sun was shining, the city alive with the promise of a new beginning. I walked home, the weight of the past finally lifting, the future wide open. That night, as I sat by the fire, I realized that the real revenge was not in David and Rachel's defeat, but in the respect I'd reclaimed, the dignity I'd restored, and the hope I'd found in standing up for myself. The journey was almost over, but the lesson would last a lifetime. The next chapter would be about healing, about forgiveness, and about the quiet strength it takes to build a legacy worth leaving behind. The days after the verdict were a strange mix of relief and emptiness, the kind of quiet that settles in after a storm has passed but before the world feels safe again. I spent the first morning walking the old neighborhood, the sun warm on my face, the air filled with the scent of cut grass and distant laughter. Neighbors who had once looked at me with pity or suspicion now waved, their smiles genuine, their congratulations heartfelt. "You showed them, Peter," one said, clapping me on the back. "You reminded us all what it means to stand up for yourself." I thanked them, my heart full but my mind still heavy with the weight of what had been lost. At home, the phone rang with messages from old friends, some offering support, others asking for advice. Carter called to check in, his voice full of pride. "You did it, Peter. You protected your legacy. Now it's time to focus on what comes next." I nodded, knowing he was right. But the hardest part was still ahead, facing David and Rachel, and deciding what forgiveness, if any, would look like. The family, once united by appearances, was now divided by truth. David tried to apologize, his words stumbling over years of pride and regret. "Dad, I'm sorry. I let Rachel turn me against you. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now how wrong I was." I listened, my anger softened by the memory of the boy I'd raised, the son who had once looked up to me with trust and love. "Respect is earned, David. You have a lot to prove." Rachel, for her part, avoided me, her confidence shattered, her place in the family uncertain. Lisa and Mark, who had watched the trial from the sidelines, reached out with quiet support, their own relationships with me growing stronger in the aftermath. As the weeks passed, the pain of betrayal faded, replaced by a cautious hope. Anna, my granddaughter, visited often, her laughter a balm to the wounds left by the trial. We spent long afternoons in the garden, planting new seeds, talking about the future, and finding comfort in the simple joys of life. The community, once divided by gossip, now rallied around me, their respect for my strength and dignity growing with every new story of resilience and hope. But even as the world moved on, I knew that the scars of the past would never fully disappear. The journey was not over, but for the first time, I believed that healing was possible. The real revenge was not in David and Rachel's suffering, but in the family's survival, their ability to forgive, to rebuild, and to find joy in the aftermath of betrayal. The next chapter would be about hope, about legacy, and about the courage to keep moving forward, no matter what storms might come. Spring arrived with a gentle insistence, the world outside my window coming alive with color and the promise of renewal. The farm, once a place of tension and whispered arguments, now pulsed with a quieter energy, meals shared around a smaller table, chores divided without complaint, and laughter that felt genuine, not forced. Lisa and Mark visited often, their children's laughter echoing through the house, their presence a balm to the wounds left by the trial. Anna, my granddaughter, became my closest companion, her curiosity and kindness a daily reminder that the future was still bright. But the real test came when David called, his voice hesitant but sincere. "Dad, can we talk?" I agreed, meeting him at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. He looked older, thinner, his eyes shadowed by regret. "I know I can't undo what I did," he said, his voice trembling. "But I want to try to make things right. I want to earn back your trust." I listened, my anger softened by the memory of the boy he'd once been. "Trust isn't given, David. It's earned, one day at a time." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'm willing to do the work." Over the next weeks, David visited often, helping with repairs around the farm, joining family dinners, and slowly rebuilding the relationships he'd nearly destroyed. Rachel, for her part, stayed away, her pride and shame keeping her at a distance. Lisa and Mark welcomed David back, their forgiveness cautious but real. The family, once fractured by greed and betrayal, began to heal, the old wounds now woven into the fabric of our lives, not as scars to be hidden, but as proof of survival. As the days grew longer and the air warmed, we started a new tradition, Sunday dinners under the old oak tree, everyone pitching in, everyone sharing the load. The meals were simple, but the conversations were rich, stories of the past, dreams for the future, and the kind of honest laughter that only comes after surviving the worst together. Anna, ever the peacemaker, suggested we start a family journal, each of us writing down our hopes, regrets, and promises for the future. "So we never forget what we learned," she said, her eyes shining. The idea caught on, and soon the journal was filled with confessions, apologies, and dreams. The real revenge, I realized, was not in David and Rachel's suffering, but in the family's survival, their ability to forgive, to rebuild, and to find joy in the aftermath of betrayal. The journey was almost over, but the promise of tomorrow was brighter than ever. As I sat on the porch, the sun setting over the fields, I felt a peace deeper than any I had ever known. The family I'd fought so hard to protect was finally whole, and the legacy I'd built was now a gift we all shared. The summer sun rose over the Wallace farm, painting the fields in gold and green as the family gathered for their first reunion since the trial. The house was alive with the sounds of children's laughter, the clatter of dishes, and the low hum of conversation that only comes when people have truly learned to forgive. I watched from the porch as Anna and Lisa organized a picnic under the old oak, their easy banter a sign that the old wounds had finally begun to heal. David arrived early, his arms full of groceries, his smile shy but genuine. He worked alongside Mark and Greg, fixing the fence, hauling water, and sharing stories of the past year, stories of mistakes, of lessons learned, of the slow, stubborn work of rebuilding trust. Even Rachel, who had stayed away for months, sent a letter of apology, her words humble and full of regret. "I know I hurt you all. I hope one day you can forgive me. I'm working on myself, and I wish you happiness." The family read her letter aloud, their forgiveness cautious but real. As the day unfolded, we shared a meal that was more than just food. It was a celebration of survival, of second chances, of the courage it takes to start again. After lunch, Anna brought out the family journal, now thick with entries from every member. Each of us read a passage, hopes for the future, promises to do better, confessions of fear and gratitude. When it was my turn, I wrote, "I am proud of the family we have become. I am grateful for the peace we have found. I promise to keep this home a place of love, respect, and second chances." The children buried the journal beneath the old oak, their laughter ringing out as they chased each other through the grass. The afternoon was filled with games, stories, and the kind of honest conversation that only comes after surviving the worst together. As the sun set and the sky turned lavender and blue, we gathered by the fire, the world outside hushed and still. I raised my glass, my voice steady. To the Wallace legacy, may it endure for generations to come. May we always remember that dignity is worth fighting for, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, and that the truest legacy is the family you build, the lives you touch, and the courage to hope. The family toasted, their voices echoing through the night, the promise of tomorrow bright in every face. As I sat back in my old chair, Anna beside me, the children at my feet, I felt a peace deeper than any I had ever known. The journey had been long and hard, but in the end, it had led us all home. The legacy I left was not in land or money, but in the hearts of those who had learned to forgive, to hope, and to begin again. As the fire burned low and the world outside grew quiet, I closed my eyes, grateful for the journey, and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that, at last, the Wallace legacy would endure for generations to come. The first cool breeze of autumn swept through the Wallace farm, rustling the leaves and carrying with it the promise of a new season. I woke early, the house quiet except for the gentle creak of old wood and the distant laughter of grandchildren already awake and plotting their next adventure. I brewed a pot of coffee and stepped out onto the porch, the sky painted in soft golden blue, the fields stretching out before me, every row a testament to the work and forgiveness that had brought us here. Inside, the family was waking up, Anna and Lisa making breakfast, Mark and David planning repairs to the barn, the children chasing each other through the kitchen, their joy a living reminder that the past no longer held us captive. I sat for a moment, letting the peace of the morning settle into my bones, the pain and chaos of the last year now a distant memory, softened by the steady work of healing and the quiet strength of boundaries finally respected. After breakfast, we gathered beneath the old oak tree, the box of letters resting at its roots. Each of us added a new note, hopes for the year, promises to ourselves and each other, confessions of fear and gratitude. I wrote simply, "I am proud of the family we have become. I am grateful for the peace we have found. I promise to keep this home a place of love, respect, and second chances." The children buried the box in the earth, their laughter ringing out as they chased each other through the grass. The day unfolded in a blur of work and joy, fields to tend, fences to mend, stories to share. As the sun set, the family gathered on the porch, the sky ablaze with color, the air filled with the scent of honeysuckle and the sound of cicadas. I sat in my old rocking chair, Anna beside me, the children at my feet, and felt a peace deeper than any I had ever known. The journey had been long and hard, but in the end, it had led us all home. The legacy I left was not in land or money, but in the hearts of those who had learned to forgive, to hope, and to begin again. As the fire burned low and the world outside grew quiet, I closed my eyes, grateful for the journey, and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that, at last, the Wallace legacy would endure for generations to come.